The cardinal nephew of Gregory XV Ludovisi, Ludovico, would certainly have benefited from his uncle's generosity under any circumstances, but for Ludovico to be as rich as he became, someone had to die, and quickly. Conveniently, as the diarist Giacinto Gili noted, this happened. On the day of 11 February, in the morning, died Cardinal Pietro Aldobrandini, Chamberlain of the Holy Church, nephew of Pope Clement VIII, who had been ill before entering the conclave, and this is the first good luck that Pope Gregory had immediately after being made pope, because it left vacant the rich benefices that this cardinal, previously cardinal nephew of a pope, once had. And that event, which Cardinal Borghese did not have in 16 years, the nephew of this Gregory had in one night. Gili made this entry in his diary a few days before Ludovico Ludovisi was made cardinal, on February 15, 1621, and makes quite clear two things. First, that Ludovico Ludovisi was given the vast wealth that had previously accrued to the late Cardinal Aldobrandini, and second, that this wealth was so enormous that the previous cardinal nephew, Scipione Borghese, could only dream of it. Scipione was in many ways a model for Ludovico. Not only did he accrue church benefices and a large fortune, but he was an eager and discerning, if omnivorous, art collector. His Villa Pinciana, just outside the city walls, was a model for Ludovico's similar and rapid purchase of lands just inside the city walls to form the Villa Ludovisi. One would imagine the two of them, with such interests in common, might have been friends, but in fact they were in strict and aggressive competition. One historian has described their relationship as overtly hostile. Ludovico was generally recognized as sensible and discerning, but that he could be hard and arrogant soon became apparent, not least in his treatment of his predecessor Scipione Borghese. Borghese was ousted from his important position in the Curia, and Ludovisi took over some of his more responsible posts. With his supercilious manner, the new cardinal succeeded in humiliating and intimidating Borghese. Indeed, it would not be too much to say that he persecuted him, insofar as such a thing was possible between two members of the Sacred College. Under the circumstances, Scipione's gift of Bernini's masterpiece, The Rape of Proserpina, in 1622, was not a sign of friendship so much as a sign of submission. Borghese spent his money attentively, continuing Cardinal Baronio's restoration of San Gregorio al Celio and restoring his titular church of San Crisogono in Trastevere. He also heavily restored San Sebastiano and the Via Appia, paid for the facade of Santa Maria della Vittoria, and scattered other largesse to the Dominicans at Santa Maria sotto Minerva. Cardinal Ludovisi was, if anything, a more prodigal donor and sponsor. He made various donations to the Irish College, of which he was protector, and gave an altarpiece for the Bolognese community church of San Petronio next to Palazzo Farnese. He donated to continue the long construction of the Cathedral of Bologna, of which he was archbishop. In Rome, he looked around to see how he could contribute to one of the new religious orders by building them a new church. He first considered building the Barnabite order, a new oval church in Piazza Colonna, in 1624, but eventually decided to concentrate his church-building energies on one site, Sant'Ignazio al Collegio Romano. As it had been Gregory XV who had canonized Ignatius of Loyola, founder of the Jesuit order, and Ludovico himself had been Jesuit educated, it was a natural sponsorship. The cardinal admired the Jesuits for the, quote, power and authority that they have over nearly all princes, end quote. So his patronage was not merely spiritual, but an affirmation of the political and public muscle of the Jesuit order. Ludovico was prepared to sink significant wealth into building this church. He committed to an initial 20,000 scudi for building works to start, with annual payments of 10,000 further scudi a year for a total of 100,000. On August 2, 1626, Cardinal Ludovisi laid the cornerstone. The construction was by no means a simple or smooth process. To begin with, the city block of the Collegio Romano already had a modest church, the Annunziata, which functioned as a college chapel, occupying part of the site of the new church. It had been built relatively recently between 1562 and 1567 and had an apse fresco by Federico Zuccari. But as the number of students at the Collegio Romano rose over 2,000, the church soon became too small. There were also problems about choosing the architect. Cardinal Ludovisi held a competition in which the front-runner was his protege Domenichino, but the Jesuits, according to Giovanni Battista Passeri in his Vita dei Pittori, Scultori ed Architetti, went to the artist's dwelling and, quote, told him not to bother about the matter because they wanted to follow the design of the Gesù. This was the first and most beautiful of their churches and had served as a model for others. Domenico answered that they ought to be pleased to have two models and that he would suggest an alternative, but it was all in vain. End quote. In the end, the Jesuits chose one of their own, a professor of mathematics called Orazio Grassi, who had never been an architect, and Grassi made an amalgamation of the two plans Domenichino had sent the Jesuits. Domenichino retired from the whole matter in disgust. In fact, the plan of Sant'Ignazio more closely resembles that of Sant'Andrea della Valle than that of the Gesù. But sidelining Domenichino, the patron's choice, was a sign that the Jesuits had come a long way from the days when they depended, flatteringly, on their first major patron, Alessandro II Farnese, less than 50 years before, and wrote him beseeching letters, asking for money to construct the Farnese Temple, the Temple of Your Eminence, the Gesù. By the 1620s, the Jesuits were prepared to take Cardinal Ludovisi's money, but not his choice of architect. Building unusually began with a facade and went back, leaving as much of the earlier church of the Annunziata functioning as for as long as possible. Work was only finished in 1685, and the planned dome was never built. The immense outlay of Ludovisi money was, in the end, insufficient to complete the church. With the election of Maffeo Barberini as Pope Urban VIII in 1623, Ludovico Ludovisi's influence in the Curia came to a relatively abrupt end, as Urban's election was a compromise between the factions led by Ludovisi and by Scipione Borghese, but which soon proved to be as hostile to Ludovisi as if Borghese himself had won. Never a strong constitution, Ludovico Ludovisi died of gout on November the 18th of 1632 in Bologna. He was only 37 years old. His great opponent, Scipione Borghese, died the following year, and both deaths left huge benefices available for the Barberini cardinals, prompting one commentator to observe that the previous pontificates were, quote, only the vigil, the true feast day of nepotism, began in Rome under Urban VIII, end quote. On April 11, 1629, Cardinal Ludovisi made his will. He began with his titles Cardinal Priest of San Lorenzo in Damaso, Vice-Chancellor of the Church, Archbishop of Bologna, and Prince Duke of Zagarolo, and made ritual, though doubtless sincere, expressions of faith and hope for eternal happiness in heaven. So far, so normal. But his will is an excellent expression of both his priorities and his resources, in which piety and dynastic policy both play their roles. Most prominent of all is his patronage of the Jesuit order, whose general and other leaders would be his executors and commissioners carrying out the payments detailed in the will. His first statement is that his universal heir is his brother, the Prince of Venosa, Niccolò Ludovisi, who had not yet become Prince of Piombino, the small sovereign state that turned the Ludovisi from a mere Roman papal family into a royal family. He makes his brother and his brother's male heirs as principal beneficiaries. He then goes through his relatives and leaves them bequests. To his most beloved mother, Lavinia Albergati, Duchess of Fiano, 3,000 scudi per annum. To his sister-in-law, the Princess of Venosa, he leaves some precious curtains in scarlet silk. To his two sisters, who are nuns in Bologna, 50 scudi monthly to pray for his soul should they survive him. To his close kin, Girolamus Ludovisi, 200 scudi annually. It should be pointed out that in the same period, 30 scudi a year was considered to be a normal wage for a school teacher. To his cousin, the Marchese Urgone Albergati, and his sons and heirs, Ludovisi leaves all the goods he has or will acquire in the city and bishopric of Bologna, and in the territory of Cento, for being a faithful and trustworthy friend. And in fact, Ugone and Ludovico were very close. Ugone's son Niccolò, in 1645, was named as brother to Niccolò Ludovisi, Prince of Piombino, on the condition that Albergati take on the Ludovisi surname and crest, and through the prince's good offices he was made cardinal in the same year, becoming Cardinal Niccolò Albergati Ludovisi. The family bonds between Ludovico and the Albergati were close and important. Albergati Ludovisi was made Archbishop of Bologna a month before becoming cardinal, which, as we know, was a role once held by Ludovico. After this bequest, Cardinal Ludovisi then begins to leave belongings to his cardinal colleagues, and this shows who his allies in the college were. First of all, to Cardinal Ippolito Aldobrandini the Younger, who was created cardinal by Gregory XV in 1621, and who was the nephew of the rich Cardinal Pietro Aldobrandini, whose benefices largely went to Ludovico. Cardinal Ludovisi leaves a painting of Christ and a reliquary decorated with gems and all ornaments, which, as he says, I offer as a monument to his love, for when my mother once passed through Florence, the Grand Duke of Tuscany gave it to her, and I kept it in my wardrobe. His next bequests are interesting. To the Cardinal Lords Medici, Boncompagni, De Torres, Ubaldini, and Caponi, I leave one painting each, to be chosen by each individual cardinal, to show my benevolence toward them, apart from certain paintings which I will name and dispose of separately. Cardinal Carlo de' Medici, brother of the Grand Duke of Tuscany, was the most princely of this group of legatees. He argued with Urban VIII, his fellow Florentine, in 1630, for protesting the Pope's decree that all cardinals should be addressed as Your Eminence. He only agreed to come to Rome finally in 1635, on the condition that he be called not Your Eminence, but Your Highness. Cardinals Francesco Boncompagni and Cosimo de Torres were both creations of Gregory XV. Cardinal Boncompagni, whose uncle Francesco Sforza was also in the College of Cardinals until his death in 1624, and hence required a special dispensation to enter the college, received a significant number of benefices under Gregory XV, who gave him the red hat in the same consistory as he gave Cardinal Ippolito Aldobrandini. Cardinal de Torres was present at Ludovico's consecration as Archbishop of Bologna in May 1621. We can presume that he was a close ally. Cardinal Roberto Ubaldini had been legate in Bologna until his hostility to Urban VIII's pro-French policies got him sacked in 1627. Cardinal Luigi Caponi was made Archbishop of Ravenna in 1621, and Cardinal Ubaldini assisted at his consecration. So this web of connections suggests a close bond between Ludovisi's friends. This group was also united within the pro-Spanish faction within the College of Cardinals. Ludovisi's role in it was guaranteed by his brother's marriage in 1622 to Isabella Gesualdo, Princess of Venosa and Countess of Conza, territories in the Spanish-controlled Viceroyalty of Naples. In fact, as the former cardinal nephew, he was the most prominent member of this faction. In a secret consistory of March 1632, the Spanish cardinal, also a descendant of a pope, Gaspare Borgia, criticized Urban VIII's supposed indifference to a possible Catholic defeat in Germany, and even threatened to call a church council to depose the Pope for this. Urban's rage at this was generally directed at the pro-Spanish faction, but was principally directed at Cardinal Ludovisi, who used the Council of Trent's rule that bishops must reside in their sees to force Ludovisi out of Rome and back to Bologna, where he died a few months later. Even after Ludovisi's death, his brother Niccolò maintained good relations with his brother's faction. In 1653, he bought from Cardinal Luigi Caponi a building which he would try to transform, using Bernini as architect, into his new family palace, now the Parliament building of Montecitorio. The following part of the will discusses Ludovico Ludovisi's determination to finish Sant'Ignazio. If the unfinished church of St. Ignatius in the Roman College shall not be in every way perfect and complete, I wish that there be a careful reckoning of expenses up to the time of my death for the construction works, and expressly do command and order my heir in the first year after my death to pay the residual sum of money to complete the church, up to the amount of 200,000 scudi. He is to extinguish every obligation toward the society in the name of this church, even if in the end the costs exceed 200,000 scudi. The cardinal, as always punctilious about the accounts, was careful to insist that there be no waste, but the amount that he had already given was significant. By the year of his death, 80,000 of the original 100,000 scudi he had already given to begin the church had been paid out. In the will, he states that he wants a total of 200,000 scudi spent, which left the Jesuits with 120,000 scudi before they would have to explain to Prince Niccolò Ludovisi exactly why they went over and how much more they would need. In the end, the prince left 10,000 scudi in his own will for the completion of the church, and his third wife, Costanza Panfili, paid for a significant amount of decoration in Sant'Ignazio, in particular the stucco ceiling and frieze by Alessandro Algardi in 1650, and left further monies to the church following her own death in 1655. This stucco decoration of the ceiling, it should be added, was completely destroyed by Andrea Pozzo when, at the end of the century, he made his famous illusionistic ceiling. In fact, Pozzo described it as being decoration that may be worthy of a kitchen, but not worthy of a church. I think he was a little harsh. Cardinal Ludovico continues in his will with his endowment to the Society of Jesus. He also leaves various church furnishings to Sant'Ignazio: 6 large silver vases, 2 large silver candlesticks for funeral candles, presumably his own, and every piece of church dress with his insignia on it. To the Jesuit Father General he gives an ivory crucifix with a red leather covering from his wardrobe. "For the unique love I have always had for the Society," he says, "that his offerings and prayers might intercede with the celestial judge on my behalf." He gives the Casa Professa, the house where the Jesuits lived in poverty immediately after taking their vows, a gold chalice decorated with diamonds, as an offering in happy memory of the canonization of St. Ignatius by his uncle Gregory XV. It must have provided a striking contrast to the poverty required by the order itself. He takes particular care for the Irish college, of which he was protector, stating that if a house had not been built for the college by his death, he is leaving them lands near Castel Gandolfo, south of Rome, and 1,000 scudi per year to be paid by his brother. If paying this should prove difficult, then his heir, that is his brother Niccolò, should give the college a house whose rental income would bring in a similar value. He entrusts the college to the Jesuits, in the hope that Ireland be liberated from heresy. To the church and Jesuit house of Sant'Ignazio in Bologna he leaves 2 silver candelabra. To his own titular church of San Lorenzo in Damaso he leaves all his remaining ecclesiastical vestments from his own chapel, the altar and its vessels, so that they may be used in memory of him in the sacred ministry. To the same church he leaves 500 scudi for an organ. Ludovico Ludovisi had also been the cardinal protector of the Capuchin order, and in fact the Capuchin church and monastery of Santa Maria della Concezione were built on lands he donated to the order. He leaves them 300 scudi for sacred vessels for his love of St. Francis. Then come individual cash donations to various Roman organizations of the poor. To the abandoned girls of Santa Eufemia he gives 2,000 scudi, to the monks of the nearby Santo Urbano 500, to the pueris literis, that is, poor students of the Roman seminary, 300 scudi. The same amount went to the confraternity of the Santi Apostoli, the poor of the parish of San Lorenzo in Damaso, the spinsters of Santa Caterina dei Funari, to the Roman Capuchins, and to the Trinitarians of San Sisto. He leaves to his familia, that is his household, 10,000 scudi, which are to be divided by his executors among his servants, according to their rank and condition. We find a piece of special generosity in the next bequest. "I leave to Lucantonio Giunti, my secretary, 2,000 scudi, part to be given to his household on his behalf, and to one servant." As this version of the will is taken from Giunti's own biography of the cardinal, we can imagine the author's pleasure at being able to record his own importance to Ludovisi. In Bologna Cathedral, Cardinal Ludovico institutes 6 new chaplaincies, 3 under the direct control of his family and 3 others under the control of the cathedral chapter, funded by no less than 6,000 scudi. The chaplain's job was to celebrate Mass daily, presumably in his memory, and to sing in the choir. Other religious institutions in Bologna received money in libri, or pounds of Roman money, granting 1,000 pounds each to 5 monasteries and further monies to orphanages and poorhouses. Ludovico's final important instruction is for his heirs to ensure that the body of his uncle, Gregory XV, is to be moved with all honors to Sant'Ignazio, where the Pope shall lie with the body of the cardinal at his feet, so that, as I lived at his feet, I should lie in death in the same position, and leave my ashes there. Cardinal Ludovisi's will does not give a sum total of his entire wealth, leaving many specifics out, and one presumes that his universal heir, his brother Niccolò, had a separate account of all the holdings he inherited from his brother. Certainly the cash amounts specified in his will are trifling in comparison to the lands and income he accrued over his short lifetime, and his splendid villa is not even mentioned, nor is his famous collection of statues. But his attachment to his relatives and friends, and especially to his allies in the College of Cardinals, comes alive through his bequests to them. Given his love for his picture gallery, it is touching that he left each of his principal friends their choice of one painting in his memory. If he left another list of paintings that were supposed to be given to specific legatees, it has been lost. The will was drawn up 3 years before Ludovisi died, but he was already in poor health and probably had a medical crisis that provoked him to make the will to begin with. His generosity and attention to detail shine through in this will, and remind us that when he was his uncle's chief counselor, he was not merely known as a cardinal nephew, as Scipione Borghese had been. He was the Cardinal Padrone, the real master of Rome, making political policy at home and abroad, while his aged uncle, himself unwell, concerned himself with the government of the church. Thank you.